is a place on earth where history is not destroyed. It is hidden. A place where access is so restricted that even top scholars are denied entry. A place rumored to contain documents that could rewrite everything we think we know about religion, power, and human history. This place is the Vatican's secret archives, or more accurately, the Apostolic Archives of the Vatican. Behind these walls lies over 50 miles of shelving, miles of corridors filled with ancient texts, sealed records, and forgotten knowledge. Millions of documents spanning over 1,000 years. Some of them are ordinary, administrative records, letters, legal documents. But others are surrounded by mystery, because not everything inside these archives is accessible. In fact, most of it isn't. And that's where the story begins. The Vatican Archives were officially established in the 17th century, but the documents stored inside go back much further. Some date as far back as the early days of Christianity. Others come from the Middle Ages, a time of power, secrecy, and control. For centuries, the Catholic Church was not just a religious institution. It was one of the most powerful political forces on earth. Kings answered to it. Empires negotiated with it. Wars were influenced by it. And through all of this, information flowed into the Vatican. Letters from rulers, reports from distant lands, trial records, confessions, secrets, all carefully preserved, but not necessarily shared. Among the known documents, we already find fascinating pieces of history. There are letters from Henry VIII regarding his request to annul his marriage, a decision that ultimately led to the creation of the Church of England. There are records of the trial of Galileo, a man who challenged the established view of the universe and paid the price for it. There are documents related to the Knights Templar, powerful and mysterious order that was suddenly arrested and dismantled. These are not theories. These are confirmed historical records. And yet, they are only a tiny fraction of what exists inside, because for every document we know, there are thousands we don't, locked away, uncatalogued, or simply inaccessible. And this is where speculation begins. Why restrict access to knowledge? Why not open everything to the public? If there is nothing to hide, why keep so much hidden? Because to understand whether these theories make any sense, we need to look at how information was controlled throughout history and how powerful institutions decided what the world was allowed to know. Because to understand whether these theories make any sense, we need to look at one uncomfortable truth about history. Information has never been completely free. It has always been controlled. Throughout history, those in power didn't just rule land, they ruled knowledge, because controlling what people know is one of the most powerful forms of control that exists. Think about it. If you decide what is true, you shape reality itself. In ancient times, knowledge was limited to a small elite: priests, scholars, rulers. Most people couldn't read. Books were rare, expensive, handwritten. Information moved slowly, and more importantly, it could be filtered, changed, or completely erased. By the time the printing press was invented in the 15th century, everything changed. Information started to spread faster. Ideas became harder to control, and that's when institutions began to respond, not by giving up control, but by tightening it. One of the most famous examples of this was the Index of Forbidden Books, a list created by the Catholic Church. This was not a rumor. This was real. the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, a catalogue of books that were banned, forbidden to read, forbidden to own. If a book appeared on that list, it was considered dangerous. Dangerous not because it was false, but because it challenged authority. Some of the greatest thinkers in history ended up on that list. Scientists, philosophers, writers, people whose ideas shaped the modern world. The message was clear. Certain knowledge was not meant for everyone. And this is where things start to connect. Because if books could be banned publicly, what about documents that were never made public at all? What about texts that were considered too dangerous, not just to restrict, but to completely hide? This is where the Vatican Archives enter the conversation again. Unlike the Index, which told the world what not to read, the archives represent something different, not visible restriction, but invisible storage, a place where documents are not destroyed, but removed from circulation, preserved, but not shared. And that creates a very different kind of power. Because when something is banned, people know it exists. But when something is hidden, most people never even realize it was there. And that leads to a much deeper question. How much of history has been shaped, not by what we know, but by what we don't? There are real historical examples of lost knowledge, texts that disappeared, discoveries that were forgotten, ideas that were suppressed. Take the Library of Alexandria, one of the greatest collections of knowledge in the ancient world. Thousands of scrolls, philosophy, science, history, much of it was lost, destroyed over time, and with it, entire pieces of human understanding vanished. Or consider early scientific discoveries, ideas that were rejected because they didn't fit the accepted worldview. For centuries, challenging authority could cost you everything: your reputation, your freedom, even your life. And this wasn't limited to religion. It happened in science, in politics, in culture. So when people ask, why would information be hidden? History already gives us the answer. Because information is power. Now, this doesn't automatically mean that the Vatican Archives contain forbidden truths, but it does explain why people believe they might. Because the pattern already exists. Control, restriction, selective access. And when you combine that with secrecy, you get something even more powerful: mystery. The human mind doesn't like unanswered questions, so it fills the gaps. Sometimes with logic, sometimes with imagination, and sometimes with stories that grow far beyond the evidence. That's how myths are born. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all hidden knowledge is fictional. Some of it is real. There are documents in the Vatican Archives that were hidden for centuries and only revealed much later. For example, certain records of political negotiations, conflicts between rulers and the church, internal decisions that shaped entire nations. When these documents were finally studied, they didn't reveal supernatural secrets, but they did reveal something else: how power actually works behind the scenes, how decisions are made, how narratives are formed, how history is shaped quietly before it ever reaches the public. And that might be the most important insight of all, because the real mystery of the Vatican Archives may not be about aliens, or ancient civilizations, or forbidden technology. It may be about something much more grounded and much more relevant: the control of information. Because every document that is preserved is a piece of history that survives. And every document that remains hidden is a piece of history that doesn't shape public understanding. And that imbalance matters. It shapes how we see the past, which then shapes how we understand the present, and ultimately, how we make decisions about the future. This is why access to information has always been such a sensitive issue. It's not just about curiosity, it's about influence. Now here's the paradox. The more restricted something is, the more valuable it appears. The less we know, the more we imagine. And sometimes, the mystery becomes more powerful than the truth itself. Because the truth, once revealed, is often less dramatic than we expect. But the unknown has no limits. And the Vatican Archives sit exactly at that intersection. Part history, part secrecy, part projection. So what is actually hidden inside? Most likely, a vast collection of historical records, some important, some ordinary, some politically sensitive, and possibly a few documents that challenge certain narratives, but not necessarily in the way the most extreme theories suggest. And yet, the mystery will never fully disappear, because full access will probably never be granted. And as long as that door remains partially closed, the question will remain open. What are we not seeing? And more importantly, what would change if we did? Because in the end, this story is not just about the Vatican. It's about something much bigger. Our relationship with knowledge, our need to understand the past, and our tendency to fill the unknown with meaning. Maybe the Vatican Archives don't hide forbidden truths. Maybe they simply remind us that we don't know everything, and that history is far more complex than it appears, because what we know is only a fraction of what exists, and what exists is only a fraction of what once was. So the next time you hear about hidden archives, forbidden manuscripts, or secret knowledge, ask yourself one simple question. Are we searching for the truth? Or are we searching for something more interesting than the truth? Because sometimes the mystery is the real story.